Hello everyone, this is the Eiffel Tower. My name is Oliver G. Today we are going to be talking about books. So if you don't like books, you've come to the wrong place. But to be fair, there's quite a bit of other chat in there about French villages and Paris and so on and so on. But today's guest is Janet Hulstrand, or Hulstrand as you might say if you had Swedish ancestry like she does. But she's got a website. You can find it on janethulstrand.com. She is an editor, a book editor, and she edited my book, Paris on Air. And as you'll hear, she lives in a village down in the sort of Champagne region of France. And when she told me she was coming back to Paris, I said, well, let's catch up for a dinner. And when she got here, we sat down in the apartment I'm staying in. Just a heads up, I'm still in one of those Paris Perfect apartments. If you want to check it out online, it's called Calvados. And we were sitting here. I left the windows open. You'll be able to hear the wind rustling in the trees, the cars going past, the noises of the 7th arrondissement while we talked about how to make a memoir. So she's written a book already. It's called Demystifying the French. She's working on her memoir. And as you'll hear in the episode, she added a polish to my book that I didn't know was even possible. So, if you're thinking about writing a book or if you've written a book, I think you'll find this one interesting. You should get in touch with Janet and she can give you the same kind of magic treatment, surely. If not, there's a little bit of an insight into how I wrote my book and how she helped me do it, plus a bunch of other stuff as usual. Hang around at the end and I'll tell you about the Ernest Hemingway live walk that I just did late last night. But until then, I'll leave you with me and Janet and a little jingle from Slim and the Beast. Let's do it. Okay, Janet, welcome to, well, I was going to say the studio, but we're not in the studio at all. Things have changed since May last year?
May 2019, right.
Right. Now we're in an apartment looking at the Eiffel Tower.
Which is pretty nice.
It is not bad, huh? Maybe I should turn this into my studio. But thank you for coming to the 7th arrondissement for today's episode. How are you?
I'm good. It's so beautiful here. It's such a nice day.
So how often do you get to Paris in general?
It depends. I mean, over the last few months, nobody was going anywhere.
Sure. What was it like in Essoir?
Well, it was nice and quiet. And I was lucky to have one of my sons with me.
Right.
So I wasn't completely alone. And one of the interesting things about it, because I live in this little village by myself, and people ask me a lot, aren't you lonely? You know, aren't you bored? Aren't you lonely? Aren't you this? Aren't you that? And during the period of confinement, nobody asked me, isn't it too quiet? Isn't it too isolated out there? It was like, ooh, you're in a good place.
Yeah. Did people want to come out and stay with you?
Yeah, but they couldn't.
Did they want to? I know of a lot of people who were breaking rules and traveling around when they weren't meant to.
Well, I had my son with me. He got there just in time. And then my other son was thinking about coming, but he had gone actually with some friends to another place in the country. And they thought they were going to go there for a few days. And then they were there for 2 months.
Oh, my goodness.
So
this, me meeting you in Essoir has been something that keeps almost happening. I don't know if you remember. So the first time was on the honeymoon that we didn't make it.
Right.
And then the second time was about, I don't know, like half a year ago or something. And I was there.
Yes.
And I was texting you.
Yes.
But I didn't know I would be there. So so it'll happen one day. I'm looking for it. It's such a beautiful place.
You should come. You're welcome.
Yeah, we did the walk, you know, like, what was it? Like an artist, which is the artist again? Renoir.
Yeah.
And what was his connection to it?
Well, it was his wife's birthplace.
Right.
And where she was raised until she was about 15 years old. And then they met in Paris. And then she sort of begged him, basically, to buy a house there.
Wow.
And eventually they did. And so then they spent summers there for more than 30 years.
I see. It kind of speaks volumes, I think, about France and small village towns. There's often cool stories like that. I mean, Essoir, is it kind of famous? Like, what did...
Well, Essoir, they have a wonderful... they've had for a while, I don't remember how many years, they've had a nice little sort of... it's not really a museum, it's more like a interpretive center that tells the story, really, of the Renoir family in Essoir.
Yeah.
And Jean Renoir, the filmmaker, he just loved Essoir. He had these wonderful childhood memories of it, and he always talked about how special it was to him. And so they've had this interpretive center, and then few years ago they had this big project, especially big project for such a small village, and they renovated the family home. They
Right.
bought it from the great-granddaughter, and they've sort of brought it back to what it would look like when the Renoir family was staying there during the summers in the late 19th century.
Right.
And so it's really nice. It's very well done, and
It's just a picturesque
something
place
to go
as
see.
well.
So you went? Did you get to go to the house?
We went. We didn't go into the house because it was closed on the day that I was there. Like we didn't plan to be there at all. We just happened to be passing through, and I was with a group of like 12 people. Long story. Well, not really. We're staying in a chateau nearby. It was pretty,
Right.
it was pretty cool, actually.
Une autre cool, right?
Exactly, the same chateau that's from the book, which we'll get to in a second. We went back there. There's a whole other story. But I was going to say, I even like the name of Essoir. It sounds like the name for like when like a genie comes out of a lamp or something. Don't you think? Essoir.
It has a sort of magical sound.
Yeah, it'd be a perfect place to base a memoir, wouldn't you say?
Yes,
Your own.
I'm working on a memoir,
Are
as
you?
a matter of fact.
Yours?
I have been for many years.
Yeah, okay.
And one of the problems with memoir is that it keeps changing.
Yeah.
The longer you live, the more there is.
Sure.
So, but yeah, I have been working on a memoir. And initially it wasn't going to really say all that much about Essoir, but now that I'm living there,
Sure.
Essoir is...
It's hard to. I found that hard to find when to stop the book because you're still living it, right? And even we were talking about this before we pressed record. Like if I was still working on my book now, obviously you'd have to include the confinement and the deconfinement and everything.
Right.
So it's like it's hard to find a spot to end it. You
Right,
know?
yeah.
It could just go on forever. Beware of that,
Yeah.
Janet. But last time you were on the show, we were talking about your other book, Demystifying the French, which I'll be linking to in the show notes and everywhere. So when can we expect the memoir to come out then?
I don't know. I have a problem with the memoir. I have some logistical problems because it initially started out, and a big part of it is sort of a tribute to my mother and her mother, who I feel I owe a lot to. It's a legacy of a love, a passion really, for reading and writing and literature that was passed down to me by them. And I think both of them would have really liked to be writers, but the circumstances of their lives didn't allow it. And I got to do that. And so it started out that way, and my mother and my grandmother were people who kept everything.
Right.
So there are boxes and boxes and boxes of letters and journals.
Is that a lot of work to go through that?
It's a lot of work to go through it because the handwriting is often small and difficult to read, and also now by this time fading.
Oh wow!
And not only that,
time.
but some of it is still stuck in a storage locker in Maryland. So one of the things I've been struggling with that is whether I need to change. I mean, I've been feeling like I can't do it until I've gotten through all those boxes.
Sure.
But I might change my mind about that at a certain point.
That is a tough thing. Like a lot of people, when they hear that I've written a book and I've used the word memoir as well, they say, "You're too young to write a memoir." And I say, "Yeah, I think I probably am, but it doesn't have to be a whole life story, does it?"
No, as a matter of fact, that's the whole thing about memoir, and you're not too young. A memoir is not an autobiography. It's a story of a part of a person's life with a particular focus.
Yeah.
And so you can do that anytime, and you can do several. And in fact, Langston Hughes wrote a memoir when he was really pretty young.
Yeah.
Younger than you, I think.
I feel like I could write, I wouldn't, and I'm not planning on it, but I feel like I could write a memoir about the last 5 years again and tell all different stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all different sort of story arcs, and, you know, because a lot happens I mean, maybe if you work at a corn mill and you do the same thing every day, maybe it's harder to have a full story twice in 5 years. But if you're living in a city like Paris, and you're collecting stories every day for a job, I think it's easy to fill a book with.
Oh, it's rich.
Yeah.
There's stories everywhere.
Yeah, and you know what I think is, especially, people often ask me about the podcast, they say, how do you struggle to find more ideas for episodes? I'm like, no, firstly, someone wrote in once, I think it was Maria, she said if you're bored of if you can't find inspiration in Paris, there's something wrong with you. And I was like, yeah, that much is definitely true. But then secondly, in terms of getting stories from other people, you can talk to the same person 50 times and get 50 different stories out of them for a podcast episode. This is the second time you've been on the show, for example. So I think there's no lack of stories.
Right.
But speaking of memoir, if we can, I would love to dive into my one with you for a bit, because you have a very different perspective on it than anyone else in the world, in that you helped me make it.
A little bit.
Well, definitely. So for people at home who don't know, Janet took the mess of bad Scrabble hand that book was and turned it into a game-winning move, right?
Well, it needed a little bit of work still, and that's what I did.
Yes.
I mean, I think what a lot of people don't know is how many times a manuscript has to be gone through to bring it really to the best place it can be. And that even can get a little tricky too in terms of public. I mean, at a certain point, it's enough.
Yep.
And it's time to publish.
Sure.
And inevitably, any writer who's really paying attention to their writing is going to look at it and say, "Oh God, I wish I had done this or that."
Yep.
So that's just too bad. That's just part of the territory. But really, it needs lots of eyes on it. And so.
And this, by the way, everyone, I don't know if people listening know much about how a book gets made. We're not talking about proofreading and finding a typo. This isn't about, oh, look, there's you put out instead of hour, for example. We're talking about editing. Yeah. This is a whole different concept to proofreading. Perhaps you should explain a little bit about...
Well, what I often say, and what I think about editing, is that editing is... a good editor is really, first and foremost, a very curious, very careful reader. So they're going to read something and think, I wonder about this, and if you're doing it professionally, where you're really trying to bring a work to the best it can be, then you're also very actively looking for things like, it seems to be going off track here. Why is this here?
Yep.
So sometimes it's looking for things that are kind of getting in the way of the main story. Sometimes it's the writer presenting himself or someone he or she is talking about in a way that you think maybe they don't really want to. It's coming off this kind of way. And so then you query. You ask questions.
And you had lots of questions on mine, I remember. I wanted to sort of tell my experience on it, and I'm really curious and kind of scared to hear your thoughts on how this all went. Because I remember when we got started, I kind of thought that you were just going to find mistakes. That's what I kind of thought was going to happen. And then I remember seeing the first... No, it wasn't even the first page. It was like the... it was... I think... do you remember originally I had like about this book section or something like that? The back page was the very first thing you'd read.
Oh, okay.
Do you remember?
I didn't remember that.
Join Oliver for this and that and basketballers and all that. Right. And you changed, or there was a lot of red on that bit. And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? And then as I looked into it, I was like, okay, I get it. You're adding like a polish to it. And sort of just what I loved as well, that I suppose the French touches. I remember I put, for example, the St. Paul Cathedral. And you're like, is it a cathedral or is it a church? Check that. And I suppose you knew exactly that it was a church, but you were being kind to me, perhaps.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing editors do, is that and even in terms of grammar and spelling, I let him say that an editor isn't somebody who knows how to spell everything or knows all the rules. A good editor is somebody who knows when they need to look something up.
Right, cool.
So...
Cool.
Yeah.
And then you just, then from my perspective, I remember looking at things and going, how did she do that she made that sentence better? Like you'd flip it, you just put that part of the sentence there. And it's funny actually, because a lot of people who've read my book say that it's written really in the sound of my voice, as we're talking now, which is really cool. Which I assume I did that, because that would be weird if you managed to edit it into my voice. But I don't know, I guess you know my voice too from the podcast.
Yes.
And I don't know.
Well, that's part of the delicacy of editing, because you really don't want ever to have a writer lose their voice.
Right.
Everybody's got their own unique voice, and it's important. When somebody contacts me and wants to have me edit something, one of the things I usually do is what I call a sound check. Mm-hmm. And I'll just edit a very small, about the book, a very small thing, and I would say this is what I would do. So then they can see what I do, and they can also see whether or not it feels like it's going to be a good fit. I mean, I'm pretty gentle and careful. I try to really always honor the writer's voice, but there's always that danger that if you're actually going to go in there and do something, you want to make sure that it feels good to the writer when they read it. Yeah. 95% of the time, when everybody I've worked for has really been pleased, and sort of said the things you said. Oh my God, it sounds so much better. Yeah. But it's still you. It's really important and it's a very intimate relationship, really. I mean, it's kind of it's like finding the right shrink or something, because an editor is taking things that people have written from their innermost selves and changing it.
Yeah, true. How interesting.
And so you need to there needs to be a trust there. Yep. And it needs to be the right match. Sometimes it might just not be the right match.
Lucky we'd met before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about what do you remember of, and you can be as harsh as you want, what do you remember when you started editing it?
Well, I was just glad that you were going to let me do it. Yeah. Because I could see that it could use a final polish. Sure. But yeah, I mean, my main thing when I first started reading it was just delight in how well your personality was conveyed. I mean, it didn't need that much. It was really fine-tuning and a few key questions. And sometimes those little questions can be more important than they seem. Like it's not a big deal, but and sometimes I even hesitate to ask, should I ask this? And then I know the answer is always yes. You got to ask and see what they say. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a mess. You said it was a mess. It wasn't a mess. It was a book almost ready. Yeah. And it just needed a little extra loving care. Yes. And I was glad and happy to be able to be the person to do it. And you did it.
You waved that magic wand. Yes, I was self-deprecating there, I suppose, because I'd put a lot of... and people had read it and proofread it. But it's true. And I say... I mean, anyone out there who's thinking to get a book edited should call Janet as a first port of call. I hope you don't mind.
Oh, thank you so much.
People contacting you. Yeah, it was just so cool. I remember it was fun. The thing that was funny too, there was one thing I can't remember, maybe you do, but there was one punctuation I always used incorrectly as well. Do you remember what that was? There was something like...
Was it semicolon?
I think it was a semicolon.
Semicolon is tricky.
Oh man, I hated that. But I remember, so I went through all of the things where I just went, she's right. So you guys at home, we had it on a big Google Doc, I think. Yes. And Janet made the changes in red, so I could accept them or I didn't reject them, or we could discuss them. And I went through all the ones that she was clearly correct and just fixed them all. And then I left some of them that I wanted to really let them percolate. Things like, I can't remember any of the examples, but it was so cool, that process of you sort of reading what I was doing and then me seeing you working on it. I don't know if that is normal with same time editing and...
Well, usually I don't. That's maybe one of the first times and few times I've edited in Google Docs. Normally I edit in Word.
Yeah, I think you tried to put this one on Word.
It's better in a way because there was a time pressure here because you were trying to get ready for your trip to the United States, which in the end didn't happen.
Let's not even talk about that.
But
although I've been doing it on Zoom, I've been all over. You tell me a place I've been.
It's so great. And you had a big thing in Omaha.
Yeah, in Omaha. Right? It was great.
From Paris.
It doesn't make sense. The one in Omaha was the biggest. I mean, it doesn't make sense because they have a great team and the Bookworm and Alliance Française and everything. But for me, in my head, it would be New York would be the biggest one or whatever. But it's been really surprising to see how different they are.
Well, there's lots of readers out there in the Midwest. Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, usually I don't work in Google Docs. I usually work in Word because that allows. So what was a little bit different about working in Google Docs is that you were able to see the changes before I sent them back to you.
Yeah, I actually loved that.
When you use Word,
Yeah.
you would see all the changes I made, and you'd still have the right, and you'd still go through and accept them or not.
Yeah.
But I would have had a chance, for example, to go back through another time and look it over myself before. And because of the time pressure and because of the fact that you were already working right behind me, so it was a little bit different that way.
Fun.
But it was fine.
Yeah.
I mean, it was fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just another example of sort of changing the way that book publishing is happening, I think, which we're talking about before needs a bit of a shake-up.
I think the fact that you can self-publish now is absolutely wonderful because it used to be. In fact, I even have a post on my blog called "Is My Book Idea Worth Doing?" or something like that.
What is the name of your blog, please?
My blog? Well, it's called "Writing from the Heart, Reading for the Road."
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
I'll be linking to that very specific blog post that you just mentioned.
Yeah, and because people used to wonder, is it worth putting all this time and effort into doing this? Is it even publishable? Was one of the questions. And now, the answer to that question is always yes.
Sure.
It is publishable.
But the answer has a little asterisk on it, and then it says, but get it edited first, because it makes a difference. But I don't know if everyone sees that asterisk. Is it asterisk or asterisk? That's the character. Don't worry, I know the answer. I want to talk a bit about forgetting your books and my books for a second. Or my book, I should say. But there are probably, I would imagine there's someone listening right now, at least one person, who is in the process of writing their own memoir, or their own book, or want to. Do you have advice for these people? And what is it?
Well, they should do it.
Yeah, why?
Because I actually believe strongly. There are a lot of people who feel like you have to be somebody, in quotes, somebody with a capital S, to write a memoir. And there are even people who go around telling people that. But I do not believe that. I believe honestly that everybody's story is worth telling. If somebody wants to tell something about their life and how they've experienced or what they feel about it or whatever it is, they should do it. The question of whether or not it's going to be a good book, that gets into how much time they spend on it. If they reach out to professionals to help them, along the way. But I honestly believe that everybody's story is worth telling.
I saw you tweet about that the other day, actually.
Yeah, because some big writer, I don't remember who it was even, said, if you think something...
It was something like everybody, it wasn't this, but it was something like everybody has a book in them and it should stay that way.
Yeah, it was like, if you think your life is interesting and you should write about it, don't, or something like that. And I was like, I said, I fervently disagree.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. The other thing is, I actually don't know about this, but I think a lot of people who write a book are maybe worried that it's not going to make any money. Do you think that's an important thing to think about?
Well, it's a realistic concern. I mean, writing books is not the greatest way in the world to make money.
It's probably the worst way.
Yes.
Statistically.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a reality that people should know.
Yeah.
That it's more likely for most people to cost them money than to bring in income. I mean, it can happen, but it's not a good way to make money. So the question is, why are you doing it then? It probably shouldn't be about money, because even if you do well, that's going to be not predictable. But there are so many reasons to write books other than that.
Leaving your legacy behind, one of them?
Yeah, for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people like to do stories, not stories, but memoirs specifically. A lot of people, as they get older, for example, want to be sure to capture some of their experiences, their family history for their children and grandchildren. And that alone can be a really good reason to publish a book. And I mean, it's a wonderful thing to do.
I agree. Yeah, for sure. What about the people who have this idea? And the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced people listening now have this idea they're sitting in their car driving around. Which state are they in America? I'm trying to picture someone. You can tell me.
Minnesota.
Someone in Minnesota right now thinking, I want to write that book. What have you got any tips on how to just make it happen? Are you one of these people that says like write 1,000 words every day?
No, I'm not, because it doesn't work for me.
It doesn't work for me either. I couldn't do it like that at all.
No, I'm a writer. It's part of who I am. I write all the time, and that's not so for everybody. But I think, I guess if somebody is not really a writer and doesn't habitually write a lot, but they want to write a book, then maybe similar advice would be good. You're going to have to. Lots of writers have been quoted saying, you ask them what's the most important thing about writing, and they say sitting in the chair and doing it. Yeah. So, it really does come down to a lot of time spent at a desk or wherever you're typing or writing. Very few people writing longhand anymore. But, if you have it as a goal to write a book, but you're not habitually writing all the time, you might have to set up some sort of schedule. But I don't even really I never like absolutes, like you have to do this many per day, because then inevitably you miss a day, or you miss 2 days, or even 7, whatever, and then you think, oh, I failed, I didn't do it. So it's not about that, it's about just keeping at it.
Yeah, it's kind of setting yourself up for failure, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I only really wrote Paris on Air when I was inspired to, like when I was feeling it, or when I had a really good idea or memory that I wanted to capture. Yeah. At least for the writing, like getting the first finished draft done. Yeah. And then it was more like a job going over it. Like, okay, I better put some time into it today. Right. But that really helped me. When I was feeling it, I just wanted to get there and write.
I think one good piece of advice that I'm not even really good at following myself, but that's why I know how important it is that it's a really good habit, an important habit to capture thoughts that you have where you're not writing and get them down. Have a little notebook. Yeah. The idea is to have one place to write it. What I do is I'm constantly writing on odd scraps of paper, and then I have a lot of odd scraps of paper around my desk and in my house, but because a lot of times you're doing other things, and the thought will come that, I should write about this, or don't want to forget that, and you should just get them down as soon as you can. Because if you don't, they go away. Yeah. And then they sometimes come back, but it's...
Often they don't. I do the same thing, but I put it on my phone. I type it, or I send it in a message to myself, and then go back and look at it. But you're right, then you forget it, they're gone. It's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, okay. I think we're sort of running out of time now. I wonder if there's any other kind of advice or guidance you can give to people who want to write.
Let's see. People should not edit themselves too soon. That's something that people do, I think, and also a really important thing is that whatever you write down first, Anne Lamott has written a really good book about writing called Bird by Bird. I've used it in writing workshops and stuff. And she has a chapter called Shitty First Drafts. Writers know that what you first put down is probably not going to be very good. It's just a start. But sometimes people who aren't really writers professionally, or not really, it's not their passion, they write something down, and then they look at it and they go, oh, this is not good. And they stop. They should not stop. They should just keep going. And you don't edit really for surface detail until way, way, way before, publication. There's no point in fixing the punctuation and the grammar and the spelling on a whole section of something that's not going to end up being used.
Yeah, I did. So when I wrote weirdly. I wrote a lot on airplanes because I liked that there were no distractions, no internet. I had a laptop, and I usually, if I don't fly a lot actually, but if I flew to Sweden, for example, where my wife is from, that's a 2-hour flight, and it was kind of like being in a little world.
Cocoon.
Yeah, and I just get on the flight, and as soon as I sat down, I'd write for 2 hours. I wouldn't even really read over it, and you can write a lot in 2 solid hours. And then the best thing, you fly back, so you get an extra 2 hours.
Yeah.
So, like getting in that zone and not rereading every sentence and putting in things like semicolons and stuff like that. It was really cool. Like finding your little space where you can do it.
No, at first you should just write. Don't even worry about don't worry about if it's any good. Don't worry about how you're going to put it all together in the end. Don't worry about any of that. Just put whatever basically comes into your head that you want to say and get it on paper. And then later we deal with it.
What about, as a final question, have you got any tips for me before I submit my next book to you for editing? Anything you think that will save both of us time?
No, you're a natural. You write well. You write the way you speak. Your personality, your spirit come through really in a very wonderfully genuine and natural way, and that's what you want.
Geez, thanks so much,
So you should just
Janet.
keep doing it.
Oh, you're such a lovely person. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Thanks so much. Thanks for editing the book, and thanks for sharing your tips with everybody at home. I look forward to working with you again.
Thanks.
Well, there you have it. Once again, janethulstrand.com. That's how you can find out more about her work. All the links to every single thing we mentioned are in the show notes below. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I realize some people don't know what I mean when I say that. If you're listening to this on your phone, then you just, on most phones, you just swipe upwards when you're listening to the podcast, and there's all like links and information and stuff down there that you can just click on. As for my own book, Paris on Air, totally sold out. You can't get it from me anymore, but what you can do while the second printing comes in is you go to theeiffeltower.com/pre-order. Just one word, pre-order, and then you can get your hands on a copy. As soon as it comes in, I'll mail it to you. And it'll be cheaper shipping now because I'm going to be sending a couple hundred to Toronto, Chicago, Houston, Washington, and Melbourne, and Paris. So if you're in any of those cities and you want a copy, get in touch because you could probably pick it up for free. But otherwise, €25. Now, enough about that. Thanks, Janet, for being the guest. I want to talk to you a little bit about Hemingway. You know, I was thinking about reading out an email. I don't know if I said this before, but in the olden days, I used to read an email or maybe two at the end of an episode. It was quite easy to do because I only used to get about one email a week. And it was such a lovely occasion to get a nice email to read out that I started and I favorited the email and then I read it out. It was lovely. Now, you wouldn't believe what my inbox looks like. And this is not just me saying I get a lot of lovely messages. When you self-publish a book, you get so many emails from people whose book hasn't arrived or who maybe wants to know about ordering, why the ebook doesn't work, or often some people who say they bought it on Amazon and I haven't got it yet. I'm like, I don't know what to do about that. But the point of that is, it's hard to find the good emails sometimes. But there are still lots, and I was scrolling through them trying to find a good one, and I thought, hang on, what I'll do instead is I'll tell you about Hemingway, because last night, midnight in Paris, you guys surely remember the podcast episode I did with Ernest Hemingway. Well, I met him last night on the streets of Paris. We did a live walk show for 40 minutes from the very steps where Owen Wilson finds all the people from Paris's past, Saint Etienne du Mont, the church. I started there. At the stroke of midnight, old Hemingway showed up next to me, and we walked down to the Luxembourg Gardens, which were closed, of course, but back up and to Rue Mouffetard, up and down that one, and then back to his place on, I think it's Rue Cardinal Lemoine, and then he vanished. Got out his keys, walked into the door, and I showed the sign commemorating his life there. It's free to watch. If you haven't watched that, that's what I want to send you to. It was really fun. It was really fun to do, and I want to do more like that. I've got a lot of messages on Instagram and Facebook about people I should try and meet for more in the series. People, common answers, Coco Chanel, Baron Haussmann, the guy who sort of designed Paris, I guess. No one said Napoleon, but just as I say Houseman, I realized that would be a really good idea too. Josephine Baker with her cheetah, that would be amazing. And there was another really good suggestion. Oh yeah, Pablo Picasso. So thanks for all the ideas. I'm going to think about trying to do more like that. But yeah, go and check out the YouTube channel. Free to subscribe. Good fun. Lots of cool videos up there. And you get the live element, which you don't get with the podcast. So go check that out. I'll end on this. If you're enjoying everything I'm doing here at the Earful Tower, I got a little treat. If you become a Patreon supporter, there's I just uploaded it yesterday, the top 20 Patreon videos of all time that I've done. The top 20 members-only videos. I selected them, a good mix of things like on a boat in the Bois de Boulogne, cycling at the Versailles Canal, lots of modes of transport, and then walks with people like Caroline de Maigret and all these authors and cool people all over town. If you like Paris and you want to escape for even just watching those 20 videos would probably take about 20 hours. But yeah, if you're locked down or you want to get into some kind of escapism, armchair travel, I just put a huge PDF up that will keep you going for a long time. So patreon.com/The Earful Tower. I'll see you over there, hopefully. If you're currently a member, why not go down memory lane and rewatch a couple of them? Otherwise, I'll see you next week with another episode Monday, as always, and I look forward to it. Have a lovely week wherever you are. Au revoir. Merci.